Welcome to today's webinar. We always thank you to take time out of your busy day to spend some time with us. We really couldn't be more excited to share with you the benchmarking guidance that Kim and the Technical Advisory Board and a lot of people in the industry have been contributing to over the past several months. And so that's the story that we're going to share with you today, is how things started, how they progressed, and how we got to the benchmarking guidance that is now available for you to review and use. And at the end, we will have time for questions, and any questions that do not get addressed on the call, we'll for sure follow up with. We'll give you contact information at the end. There's contact information in the guidance itself. So the agenda for today will be to set the context, starting out with the Program Operator Consortium goals and how we align with ISO 14025. We will review the Transparency Report EPD framework, which is our two-part PCR program, and how that works. And then we'll get into the benchmarking guidance itself, again, how it was developed, the goals that we set out to achieve, and ultimately the content of the benchmarking guidance and the benchmarking appendix and all the components of the guidance document. Then we're going to walk through how the content of an industry-wide EPD and product-specific EPDs are similar and ready for comparisons, looking at the opportunity to provide comparative information in the same disclosure. We will share with you some of the key topics that were most hotly debated in the development process in the spirit of full transparency. And then we're going to put out a call to action. We are looking for groups of manufacturers or industry groups to pilot this guidance by creating the benchmarking appendix, which are the rules for how to do the industry-wide EPD. Because this is guidance, the opportunity is to improve it through use. So getting a first group of pilots going and getting feedback on how it's working or not working allows us to continue to update it and improve it so that we are successful and you are successful ultimately at improving the environmental performance of products in the built environment. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Program Operator Consortium, it was started 3 years ago with Sustainable Mines, NSF, ICCES, and ASTM, and more program operators and affiliate members have joined since then because we all agree on one thing, which is if this is going to be successful in terms of standardizing, making environmental performance part of the way manufacturers make products, then it needs to become simpler, more standardized, and there need to be more useful reporting solutions. So that's what the consortium is aligned around. With the common background being ISO 14025. So we always look to that document for our guiding principles as program operators. And we pull content from the introduction of 14025 simply to lay out the introduction and goals from that document. So in the introduction right there, it lays out that the harmonization of general program instructions and particularly product category rules are encouraged between programs to meet the principle of comparability. So right in the introduction, it starts talking about comparability. And it goes on to say that includes mutual recognitions of rules with respect to PCR development, review, verification procedures, administrative procedures, and format. So 14025 itself calls for standardization, comparability, and knowledge sharing. It also instructs us to consider the information needs of different purchasers or user groups. And we like to bring that to people's attention because, again, the way that Type 3 environmental declarations are being used in the building and construction industry now is for architects, builders, contractors, non-LCA experts to utilize them to make decisions in product selection. So considering the information needs of those people who are not technical experts and want to make decisions about products really informs a different kind of perspective on the standards and the rules and ultimately the reports that get delivered. The last point we're going to make about 14025 right now is in the objective section. It says the overall goal of a Type 3 environmental declaration is to encourage the demand for and supply of those products that cause less stress on the environment through communication of verifiable and accurate data, thereby stimulating the potential for market-driven continuous environmental improvement. So it is intended to help manufacturers through this reporting process create preference for their products that they can credibly demonstrate are higher performing and continuously improving. The sub-bullet points here are to substantiate that improvement through providing LCA-based information and additional information about the environmental aspects of products. They are to assist purchasers to make informed comparisons between products. And we're going to come back to this point later. This is text directly from 14025. To assist purchasers to make informed comparisons between products, although these declarations are not comparative assertions. They are to encourage improvement of environmental performance and ongoing continual improvement, and to provide the information for assessing environmental aspects over their life cycle. The Program Operator Consortium goals are to provide more useful environmental product transparency solutions that meet the goals and requirements of 14025 and serve to reduce the complexity that exists in the marketplace today. We're doing that by standardizing how LCA-based standards for reporting environmental information get created, by providing improved reports to help decision makers specify materials and products, and combining efforts to improve access to and recognition of manufacturers' product transparency reporting. We are always doing research. We are not an R&D organization, but by all of the interactions that we have with manufacturers and building professionals, there's a continual learning process. And LCA practitioners, they're obviously a key constituency. And some of the questions that we just continue to work on and inform all of the new technical standards and reporting tools are always framed by these set of questions, which is, how much LCA content should be required in a Type 3 environmental declaration? Again, considering the audience and what the intent of an EPD is. Further, when and why is full compliance with the ISO standards and the international standards, 15804 and 21930. They are European and global standards, but when is full compliance required? Is it all the time? Is it sometimes? We're always looking at the challenges for manufacturers to deliver LCAs, to be able to comply with different program standards and guidance. How much does a manufacturer need to know, and how many different things are they going to be required to do? We're always also looking at the difficulties for doing LCAs, whether they're being done by providers, LCA service providers and technical experts, or if the LCAs are being done internally by manufacturers who may not actually have LCA technical experts, but they have technical people who are coming up to speed on doing LCAs. So no matter the spectrum, whether you're beginning or really an LCA technical expert, when there's so many differences in the way PCRs get written, and in this case, you'll see if you look at the benchmarking guidance, it means that, it's kind of like, tax preparers having to know the tax code that then is always changing. It makes it harder to do and more expensive. Just to be frank, it's more expensive if it's harder to do, and it takes longer. When things are inconsistent, it's more difficult for the verifiers, both on the LCA and EPD side. And ultimately, we're always looking at what content is useful to building professionals to make better informed decisions. How are they going to use that information? And certainly this whole next phase of whole building LCA is here upon us, and it's something that people are looking to do. So how does the work that we do inform that? So at this point, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Kim Lewis, herself an LCA technical expert and also the Transparency Report Program Manager. And Kim, please take it away.
Thanks, Terry. So like she said earlier, I'll be talking a little bit first about how our program works to give you some context for the benchmarking guidance. So as many of you know, the intent is that the Program Operator Consortium members use a standardized PCR creation process so that all of our PCRs are streamlined, consistent, and aligned with the industry around one common set of LCA rules so that the EPDs we create are presented in a consistent way. So this makes purchase decisions easier, and it makes it easier to understand how to use the information in an EPD. So at the end of Part A is Appendix C, which is the content requirements for the declaration. So when we think about what content should go into a declaration, we have to think about what would help non-technical people make better informed decisions. So the way Appendix C is laid out goes through each of the sections required by ISO 14025 for content in a Type 3 environmental declaration. And it's very specific about how much of the LCA information needs to go into a market-facing document. And then any other content that gets put into the declaration in our Appendix C must pass the test of being useful for users. So our brand of EPD is a transparency report, which is 3 pages and delivered in the cloud. But Appendix C can be used for any type of EPD. So I talked about Part A, and the Part B of the PCR is done at the product group level because product groups are defined by the functional performance that the product delivers, which really drives all of the LCA calculation rules that you put into a Part B. So there's a very simple Part B creation form that the PCR groups use so that all the things that need to be considered get talked about, and then it's compiled into only a couple pages of requirements. You can see a filled out one on the right. And then that partners with Part A to make a full PCR, plus when you add the benchmarking addendum, which I'll talk about later, you have a full PCR with benchmarking information. So now we'll transition to talking about benchmarking guidance. So it includes how we developed it, why we developed it, and what's in it. The first time we introduced the guidance was during a webinar in July, where Aaron from Architecture 2030 talked about the reasons for benchmarking. James from NRMCA talked about his experiences with creating an industry-wide EPD. And we went over the first draft and put out a call for comment. And then that public comment period lasted for a month. And we received a wide range of comments that covered market participation, impact category selection, uncertainty, retroactive participation, and comparisons. So the technical advisory board had 2 meetings to specifically address those comments and to get to a final draft. This is our current tab, so it's made up of LCA experts, industry representatives with experience in LCA, and representatives from program operators who have LCA expertise. And the reason we worked on creating benchmarking guidance was because we wanted to create a standard way of making industry-wide EPDs so that we could benchmark environmental performance of products within the same product group. So doing that would help the industry try to reduce their greatest impacts, enable manufacturers to compare product-specific LCA results to the industry-wide results, let users earn lead credit, and just overall help manufacturers reduce their impacts on the environment. In the past, industry-wide EPDs have been created primarily for efficiency and cost savings, but not necessarily for benchmarking purposes. So not everyone who participated in those EPDs has fully realized the value from the end results, either because they haven't been utilized or they're only valued at a half product in LEED version 4. Now they have another high value purpose and they're easier to do. So since the guidance is in kind of an instructional format and the benchmarking addendum form is always in the same format, it lets manufacturers spend more of their time working together. More of that time is focused on rule creation. And plus, they can optionally include industry-wide results in the product-specific EPD, which is what building professionals want. So going back to LEED, the LEED version 4 language for environmental product declarations provides 2 options. So option 1 is for having the EPD, and then option 2 provides 1 point for demonstrating impact reduction below the industry average. So the LEED language here isn't very well defined because it doesn't quantify impact reduction and it doesn't define what the industry average is or how to get that. So at the very start of developing this guidance, we looked at current industry-wide EPDs and looked at the USGBC guidance for benchmarking. So we built on those rules, but with one change. So instead of requiring all manufacturers to use the same exact software and version number, like having everyone use GABI 7 with Service Pack 32 or something, we only require that any key background data sets required to be used by all participants are made available in a way that gives the same results regardless of the software used. So that could be in a spreadsheet or some other way. But the reason we did this was to level the playing field so manufacturers wouldn't have to purchase another piece of software they weren't using before. They could use what they already had. And then in addition to what the USGBC guidance had, our guidance also has participants select, in addition to global warming, the impact categories required based on what's appropriate for their industry. Then it also addresses defining the threshold of improvement or reduction, which is based on uncertainty calculations, and it helps with setting recommendations for improvement based on what participants learned from doing the LCA. So the guidance starts off by stating its purpose, how it was developed, and then goes into section 1, talking about how to establish an industry-wide EPD. Then section 2 talks about how to compare to the benchmark, and then an explanation of what the benchmarking addendum is and how it works with Part B. So when establishing an industry-wide EPD, it has to be for one product group. Then the participants set the minimum market participation appropriate for their industry. And then they also specify the required impact categories, data use requirements, retroactive participation requirements, and LCIA method and version number. They also specify the threshold for improvement for each impact category, which is based on uncertainty calculations. And then there's the industry-wide EPD content requirements, including guidance for making improvement recommendations. So in section 2, for making comparisons, the product-specific EPD and industry-wide EPD must have the same modules with the same cradle-to-grave scope and show improvement based on the quantitative uncertainty of the industry-wide results, since uncertainty is likely to change depending on the product and the industry and the data collected. So there needs to be consistency between the LCIA method and version number. And then there has to be some interpretation addressing what contributed to the difference in results. And then any comparisons optionally made within the product-specific EPD is reviewed by the verifier. So when we say comparisons here, just a reminder, we're not talking about comparing one manufacturer's product to another manufacturer's product. What we're doing is comparing manufacturer's product to the benchmark. So that's the type of comparison called for in the lead credit language. So we wanted users of this guidance to be able to use it regardless of whether there was already a PCR for their product group. So whether you're creating a new Part B or using an existing Part PCR, you can create a benchmarking addendum that has all of the additional rules required for benchmarking. So this introduces a standard process for creating industry-wide EPDs, which all contain the same content in addition to the program's regular EPD content requirements. And the benchmarking addendum form itself will have the definition of the product group, if any further definition is needed, the minimum market participation, retroactive participation, impact category selection, and background data set requirements, plus the LCIA method and version number, and the threshold of improvement for each required impact category. So the way it works is anyone can start a request form. They're publicly available and can be used by any group of manufacturers or industry association or program operator. And when they're completed, they can be submitted to the program operator. Then if there is already an existing PCR for your products, you can define the product group or groups that the PCR covers, and then fill out a request form for each product group. And if PCR doesn't already exist, you can work on benchmarking concurrent with the creation of new Part Bs. Related to this, I'll give you a quick intro. So we created the North American PCR catalog for two reasons. There was a need for a centralized source of PCRs, and we wanted to benchmark the state of PDR development in North America. And now what we can do is add a column for benchmarking addenda. So this way you can easily identify which PCRs have benchmarking rules. Here's an example. And the validity date still corresponds to the validity of the PCR. This guidance explains how to set recommendations for improvement for your industry based on where the greatest impacts across all impact categories are, not just carbon footprint. Similar to the goals set by Architecture 2030, the recommendations are meant to be industry specific, and the reduction targets are meant to be impact category specific. You can make 2 or 3 recommendations based on the largest contributors to the most important impact categories for your industry, all based on an assessment of materiality and operational reduction or new product design. And these recommendations can be quantitative or qualitative, depending on what your industry thinks is best. So to summarize, we want each industry to ask, where are the impacts and how do we set improvement goals around that? This also introduces a standard process for creating comparisons of product-specific results to the benchmark. These comparisons showcase the industry-wide and product-specific EPD results side by side with the % improvement or reduction in each impact category based on uncertainty. So if all your results are within the threshold for uncertainty, your product will be considered equivalent to the benchmark. So graphs compare the 2 highest and lowest performing impact categories relative to the benchmark, but it's not enough to show data side by side. So we're requiring that the manufacturer explain the relative environmental performance shown in these results and graphs, and then what they're doing to achieve this performance. So now I'll take you through page 2 of a product-specific transparency report, which is our version of an EPD, so that later it can show you how it can be transformed into a comparative version. So in the left column, right away you can see the scope and summary, including the functional unit and the default scenarios, followed by the material composition and total impacts by life cycle stage. Then in the right column, you can read about what's causing the greatest impacts for all life cycle stages, and then zoomed in on the most impactful life cycle stage. And then we already have a place in this green box to talk about what the manufacturer is already doing to improve the environmental performance of their products. So here we can see which life cycle stages and which information modules are included or excluded, plus the single score results for each life cycle stage. And then finally, we have the Tracy results for each impact category and the references section with this box that shows the value of this document in different rating systems. So now I'll show you how we're going to make the comparison more understandable. So we'll include a comparative table of results, graphs showing comparisons for key impact categories, interpretation of the environmental performance relative to the benchmark, what the manufacturer is doing to address the goals set in the industry-wide EPD, links to the industry-wide EPD and LCA, and the rating systems box with that lead optimization credit. So comparative results are reported for each impact category by life cycle stage. And when we zoom in, you can see that the industry-wide and product-specific results are presented side by side with the % improvement or reduction right there in the table, with the LCA background report and the industry-wide EPD linked in the references section. The total impacts of the highest and lowest performing impact categories are represented as graphs, where you can easily see the improvement or reduction for the most affected impact categories. And then perhaps most importantly, this interpretation section explains why your product is different compared to the benchmark. It explains which materials and processes contribute to the difference in results for the most affected impact categories, and it addresses the uncertainty associated with them. And then in this green box, we show what the manufacturer is doing to improve the relative performance relative to the improvement recommendations described in the industry-wide EPD. And then in the rating system section, this is what it would look like if that multi-attribute optimization point was earned for lead version 4. So to recap the types of transparency reports we're talking about, earlier I demoed a live product-specific report. Then I just took you through the comparative report to compare the product-specific results to the benchmark. And then there will also be a template for the industry-wide report. And that's the content of the guidance and how it's used in the transparency reports. So to finish this off, I'll go over to the key topics we discussed during those 2 tab meetings, and then show you our call to action and hopefully be able to answer your questions. So these were the topics we spent the most time discussing and the decisions we made in those tab meetings. Starting off with market participation. So since it looks at how many people need to participate in order for you to do benchmarking, it really looks different depending on the industry. So we're going to let the participants decide what's best for their industry. And then, like I talked about earlier, there won't be requirements on software, only if background data sets are required, which participants decide. And then that helps create a level playing field. Also, since each group will have a different dynamic, we're letting participants decide how retroactive participation will work. We decided to make including industry-wide results in product-specific results totally optional, and then we leave it up to the manufacturer to decide whether they want to do that. And then when they are included, there's no need for a separate comparison document, and it makes it easy to see the difference compared to that benchmark with the interpretation. So some concerns that were raised during this discussion were that there was some uncertainty about the language in the standard and whether it was a comparative assertion or not, or whether it could be incorrectly assumed to be a comparative assertion by a reasonable user. So our interpretation of ISO 14025 is that the industry-wide EPD is not referring to a competing product, but rather a benchmark to which the product is compared. So the definition of comparative assertions wouldn't apply since it's only to competing products, not an industry benchmark. So as you can see, the definition of comparative assertion is an environmental claim regarding the superiority or equivalence of one product versus a competing product that performs the same function. So with that, like all other documents in our program, we're always accepting comments on the guidance. Part A 2018 is coming up. Keep your eye out for that. And this will be part of that distribution. And to comment, you can go to the Program Operator Consortium website. And the link to the survey is in the article introducing the final version of this guidance. And then maybe most importantly, so the people who participate in industry-wide EPDs should be acknowledged for their efforts. And we did something about that. So all industry-wide, all industry groups, manufacturers who participated in an industry-wide EPD that was created by Program Operator Consortium members are added to the transparency catalog. So if we go to an industry association, for example, the Polyisocyanurate Insulation Manufacturers Association, we can see that they have 2 industry-wide EPDs. So if we click on this first one, you can see who the participants are. And so I see John's Manville, so I can go back to the catalog. Okay, I see John's Manville. And great. Okay, so I can see there are the 2 industry-wide EPDs that they did. And let's see. And then the manufacturer can contact us about adding their products with transparency documents. And I also saw GAF. So if we go to GAF's listing, you can see, so in addition to the industry-wide EPD, they have already listed all their products with transparency documents. So I see EPDs, HPDs, declare labels, and cradle to cradle. And there you go. So that's back to you, Terry. Terry, I think you're on mute.
Hey, Kim. Great job of covering a lot of content in a short period of time. Be thinking about questions. All of you folks out there listening in, unless Kim did such a great job, there aren't a lot of questions. I know it was quite a lot of content. One of the things that Kim was just touching on about acknowledging all of the participants in an industry-wide EPD, we had a lot of discussions with manufacturers who had participated and industry associations, and a lot of the feedback that we got was that it was a lot of work, it took a lot of time, and folks didn't really get a lot of value. We even heard somebody say, that the industry-wide EPD was ignored. And, in large part, industry-wide EPDs had been created in the past when, it's a material or a product that's manufactured by a lot of manufacturers with facilities all over the world. And it's just most efficient to create that industry-wide EPD that then everybody can use. The fact that they qualify for half a product versus a full product lead, I think, is a little bit of a disservice, because it's still a lot of work and still a lot of risk to share data and participate in a group like that. So now with this additional incentive to create an industry-wide EPD for comparative purposes, we feel that it's even more important to acknowledge the manufacturers who do step up to participate, and further, those who participate and those who then also do product-specific EPDs should really get the benefit of participating both at an industry level as well as doing the awesome task of creating EPDs for their products. Kim, why don't you flip back to the deck? And that is why our call to action to folks on this call and others that you know is to contact us about participating in a pilot benchmarking addenda process. Now, I want to be clear, we are not asking industry groups or even just a couple of manufacturers who want to get going and create the rules. We're not asking anybody to commit to doing the industry-wide EPD. We are only asking that they pilot creating the benchmarking addenda and to use the guidance to see how it works. And is it well enough articulated to address all the questions that come up without leaving kind of big gaping holes about how things should be done? By going through a pilot, we'll be able, with a number of groups, we'll be able to gather enough information about those questions or those processes that came out of it that could be utilized and shared back with the industry, but also in the document. And we have made a commitment to the USGBC to provide feedback to them on this guidance, because obviously this lead credit was in there for a reason, but they are also aware that today there really is no way to earn that credit, when in fact their forward-looking initiative is to drive continual improvement. So lots of benefit for raising your hand and piloting the benchmarking addenda. We don't think it's going to take a lot of time, particularly if it's a pilot and you just go through the process. You can then decide if you want to more formally then put it through tab review. Kim showed the PCR catalog where we will be adding to each PCR whether or not there is a benchmarking addendum, and when the industry is ready to go ahead with the industry-wide EPD, and when that is done, that will get promoted in the catalog, both in the industry associations listing as well as in the participants listings. And by the way, in case not all of you are familiar with Sustainable Minds or have heard our latest news, we're taking product transparency to the mainstream in 2018 through our partnership with MasterSpec. And later in the year, all of the products in the catalog and all of the manufacturers in the catalog will be accessible through MasterSpec. So we're super excited about continuing to execute on our goals of standardization and simplification and changing the impact that building products have on the built environment. Please contact us to learn more about how we'll support you and what you're interested in getting done. And we are now at our Q&A period. And there are a couple questions, Kim. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. There was a question about your comment about the group working on the appendix would be able to select the impact categories to include. Can you talk about how many impact categories are required? How many total must be in an industry-wide EPD or in any EPD to be to meet LEED or other criteria? And that's my question.
Sure. So with our program, it depends on what program you're using. Our Part A requires 5 different impact categories, and then there are an optional other 5, and so those are required by our program. ISO 21930 has their set of impact categories, and I believe those are required in Part A. And then, so when you're selecting, you can decide, okay, if there are optional impact categories, are there any that we want to make required? And then if, for example, if one impact category is particularly relevant to your industry, but it's not required by ISO 21930, and you want to be compliant with ISO 21930, then you can decide to make that impact category required.
Okay. We have a number of questions to get to, but if anybody has follow-ups to that, please go ahead and post them. A couple questions were, yes, this deck will be available to you. There's a quick survey on your way out, and we ask you, would you like the presentation sent to you, which we're happy to do. And the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Program Operator Consortium's website, as well as the Sustainable Minds website, so you'll have access to that as well. The next question, Kim, can you jump back to the catalog? There's a question about the contents of the catalog. So if you go back to the front page and scroll back up. So the catalog includes, scroll down just a little bit, it says 900 plus brands and thousands of products. Sustainable Minds monitors the industry on an ongoing basis and updates the catalog sometimes weekly, usually monthly, to add all of the manufacturers who have done any kind of product transparency disclosure, whether it's an EPD or material ingredient disclosure, from every program operator. So not just Program Operator Consortium members, but all UL manufacturers who get EPDs from UL, they get added to the catalog. Any manufacturer who does any kind of material ingredient disclosure, cradle to cradle, HPD, declare, product lens, they get added to the catalog. So part of our intent with the catalog is this number is important because there's a perception in the industry, and I learned about this again participating in an AIA meeting at Greenbuild, that there's a perception that there aren't enough products in the marketplace today to really effectively meet the green building rating system requirements, which is patently untrue. When we launched the catalog last year, there were only 350 brands across all of those program operators and all of those material ingredient programs. Within 1 year, we've seen that go from 350 to over 900 who have gotten started creating transparency disclosures in some shape or form. And by the way, at the end of the year, we will be publishing a trend report that looks at the growth of this industry because of the way that we've been able to track it. So watch for that, and I think you'll probably find that interesting. Our next question, there was a point of clarification, and the question is, wanted to be clear, we are talking about comparing industry-wide EPDs to a manufacturer's EPD within that industry and not a competing industry. And yes, that's exactly right. And to put even a finer point on it, we're talking about PCRs or Part Bs being done at the product group level, as is the benchmarking appendix. And we define product groups as products that deliver the same functional performance and therefore would compete for the same specification. So the PCR should be at the group level, and the appendix, the benchmark, should be at that group level, because otherwise the performance or the impacts are too general. And then if you're trying to compare a product-specific EPD to a category level benchmark, it's an unfair comparison. So literally, we're trying to create an apples to apples comparison by having PCRs get created at the product group level, and then the benchmark gets created for that product group. So then the product specific EPD is done just like the industry-wide one is, and we will have an apples-to-apples comparison. Okay, next question. Did you cover whether this complies with ISO 21930? Kim, would you like to take that question?
Sure. So that depends on the program you're using. And Part A has a compatibility appendix for ISO 21930. So when we update Part A for 2018, we'll be adding the compatibility appendix for the 2017 version of ISO 21930. And you can use that with the program and be compliant.
Kim, do you want to explain what a compatibility appendix is?
Yep. So a compatibility appendix basically has the extra rules required on top of what's already in Part A to be required or to be compliant with standards or different PCRs.
Right. So what's important about that, at the beginning, I'd asked the question that we continually ask the TAB, the Technical Advisory Board, and then manufacturers, when is it that a manufacturer wants their Type 3 environmental declarations to be compliant fully with 21930? So the Program Operator Consortium Part A is created for North America, and it is a combination of ISO 14025, EN 15804, and 21930. And it comprises what the Technical Advisory Board and the industry, because it's open for public comment, believes is the right set of rules for creating Type 3 environmental declarations for North America. Now, the compatibility appendix for ISO 21930, as Kim pointed out, includes all of the additional rules for 21930 that are not currently in this two-part program for North America. So when you want your Type 3 environmental declarations to be fully compliant with 21930, then you would add the additional content requirements as stipulated in the appendix to your EPDs, and then there you would be fully compliant with 21930. So again, it's modular. You can create the reports that you need to do the job that you need them to do, whether they're for North America, whether they need to be global, or just European. With a modular approach, you don't need to be overproducing content every time you create a Type 3 environmental declaration. Okay, next question. Can you use this comparative methodology to compare two industry-wide EPDs using the same PCR? Kim, do you want to unbundle that question?
Yeah, so since we are creating, I'll start by saying, so when our PCRs are per product group, so one Part B is for one product group, so you instead of having one PCR that covers several product groups. So if there's some reason that you have PCR or Part Bs for two different product groups, the rules will be different. So no, you wouldn't be comparing the industry-wide EPDs to each other.
Right. I think in a forward-looking capacity, I'm not sure if currently or in the past, I don't know whether there have been two industry-wide EPDs using the same PCR, but moving forward, the goal would be that there is one industry-wide EPD that provides for retroactive participation. And Kim, do you want to just touch again on what retroactive participation is and why it's part of the guidance?
Yeah, so retroactive participation is when an industry-wide EPD gets created, and then another manufacturer wants to also participate in that industry-wide EPD. So in our guidance, the participants of the original industry-wide EPD, or the people who write the benchmarking addendum, will decide a pathway for any manufacturer who comes in late and then wants to retroactively participate in the EPD.
Great. Yeah, I mean, we just felt it didn't seem right to penalize manufacturers every 5 years for not being ready to start or participate when the work is being done. And further, things change. And so leaving it up to each group to decide how retroactive participation will work seemed the way to go. And there have been a couple ways to do that suggested. There's a few more questions. We don't have a ton of time. This is a good question. Is the pilot guidance an activity from the Program Operator Consortium or an activity from Sustainable Mines? So, Kim, do you want to go back to the tab page on the Program Operator Consortium website? When the Program Operator Consortium was formed, Sustainable Mines had already created this two-part PCR program in that has this standardized set of tools, and we already had put together a technical advisory board. When we formed the Program Operator Consortium, each program operator who's part of the consortium added their own technical representative to the technical advisory board. So the technical advisory board, while it is run and managed by Sustainable Minds, is made up of representation from LCA industry experts, manufacturing representatives, and technical folks representing each of the program operators. So it is meant to be an industry-wide guidance. It's free to use. You can download it. It's there for public consumption. A couple more questions. I'm going to combine two from one very engaged participant. Thank you. The first part of the question posits, why even do industry-wide EPDs when there are typically there are differences in energy sources and carbon emissions? Those below an industry benchmark will be embarrassed, and those above will tout their position. Specifiers buy from manufacturers and not from industries. So Kim, can you address how those differences in energy sources and carbon emissions get dealt with in either the Part B or in the benchmarking guidance?
I mean, we don't deal with the carbon emissions and energy sources specifically in the guidance. This depends on the PCR. But the benefit to doing an industry-wide EPD would be basically like an exploration into how you can reduce your impact on the environment. So when people see that you've done one, you're positioned as somebody who cares about transparency.
But correct me if I'm wrong, in the PCR development or the Part B, there is the opportunity to create additional rules to provide for energy sources to help with standardization and comparability, right? So that everybody's using the same scenario. So that's an issue that comes up in the creation of the PCR. And when you use a standardized format, that's something that gets considered. But I think to Kim's point, the higher reason, the bigger purpose reason, and why we had the first webinar with Architecture 2030 is really for industries, and as this person points out, manufacturers and people are what make up industries. And the only way that the impacts from the built environment are ultimately going to be mitigated or diminished is by benchmarking where are we today and where can low-hanging fruit improvements be made and what are the long-term things we need to work on. So only by establishing where we are today and where we want to go are those improvements going to happen. And that's why in the guidance, the tab and participants decided that it wouldn't be appropriate or aligned with the intent for a purely numeric comparison to be made to an industry benchmark, because that doesn't demonstrate knowledge necessarily on the part of the manufacturer or really what they're doing to improve. And that's why we really went to great lengths to also require the definition of what is a meaningful improvement, and that's set in the appendix, and that each of the comparisons needs to be substantiated with, real rationale that people will understand. And so, if a manufacturer is lower than the benchmark or higher than the benchmark, they may not be low on everything, they may not be high on everything. This is where a manufacturer gets to use the data to tell their own story. And I think we'll see once there's parameters around the presentation of data that people will be able to engage in, here's what we're working on, or here's what we know we have to do, here's what we did in the past, and that's why we're doing great on this one and not so good on the other one. But it will start to create, I think, a more intelligent conversation about environmental performance and what it means for improving the built environment. There's a couple questions left, and let's answer one more because we're running a little bit over now. Let's see. Kim, I'm going to leave this one to you, which is benchmarking simply semantics for working around ISO's position that cradle-to-gate EPDs are not intended for comparison and only cradle-to-grave EPDs should be compared?
We agree that only cradle-to-grave EPDs should be compared, so I think we're right in alignment with that sentiment.
Well, that's it. We're going to wrap up now, and I want to thank everybody for attending in the first place and sticking around through the end. Again, leave any questions, comments, feedback on your way out, and we will do our best. Not even we will do our best, we will follow up with everyone who has left a comment or a question. But really, please consider, if you're an industry group, industry association representative, please reach out to us. If you're a manufacturer who has said, yes, we believe that there would be value in being able to compare our product specific to an industry-wide, please contact us. We will be able to facilitate putting groups together. But this is really important. We want to get this off the ground and start sharing the learnings with the rest of the industry and get this going in the right direction. Once again, thank you. Thank you, Kim. Great job. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care.